Hi, this is Sarah. Thanks for listening to my show, Meant for More Conversations with Sarah Ali Moore, where we explore our greatest potential, the call to serve, and leading heart-centered change with full authenticity. Hello, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Happy Thursday. Welcome to Meant for More Conversations. It's your girl, Sarah Ali Moore, and I am really excited to talk about this TEDx talk, this topic around assimilation as colonization. This incredible talk. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, you can find the link in the description section of our chat tonight and also on my page. So please, if you have not had a chance to watch this talk, please do so. It is so powerful. It will resonate with you. It will resonate with the heart of every person, along with really bringing forth the understanding and the detriment of assimilation in our society. So I'm really excited to have my friend, Nga Vương-Sandoval here, and she is a powerhouse, I have to say, Nat. It is amazing to watch what has evolved for you since this TEDx talk and to learn about the work you're doing. Nat is the refugee Congress delegate for Colorado. If you've listened to her story, she talks about how she and her family had to flee from their homeland due to the Vietnam War, where they became refugees. This became the passion and the heart of the work that she does for the refugee community, especially here in Colorado, around education, advocacy, storytelling, training, and lobbying. She is also serves as an investigator at the Colorado Department of Law, and she was currently a TEDx presenter at the TEDxcherrycreekWomen event that we were both a part of. And it has been incredible to get to know you, Nat, and to hear this wonderful talk of yours. And I'm really excited to dive into this conversation today, which is just so apt for the moment that we are all in, as tensions are heightened, as we are shifting from one administration to a new administration, and we are really getting to see a lot of the things that have been under the surface percolating that are coming forward. And really the nature of many conversations that we've been having across this past year, 2020, has really opened up or shown us the vulnerabilities and weaknesses in our societies and how those vulnerabilities and weaknesses impact different communities, especially those who are marginalized and underserved in our communities. And so this topic, I mean, Nat, come on, am I right? It's sort of perfect for this time right now. So first, before we dive into this, can I just ask you, how did it feel when you received that email that you had been accepted to do a TEDx talk? And what does it mean to you in your community to be able to give voice to this topic right now?
First of all, thank you so much, Sarah, for creating this space for all of us, because as you and I already both know, this group of women, they're just incredible. Absolutely incredible. And for us to expand the topics that we've been talking about that are close and dear to us, it's a gift. So thank you for having me, and thank you for creating this platform for us to further discuss issues that, especially this one, as you were saying, is really pertinent to what happened yesterday, last night, as well as just what's been happening for the past couple years that have just been very jarring to us.
Yeah.
So as far as my reaction, this was not the year I was expecting something like this to happen, because I thought we're kind of restricted on the way that we're doing things right now, and we have to get very creative in the way that we're trying to convey our message, right? And we had to be a lot more nimble back in March as to how we were going to connect with people and how we were going to get our messaging across. So I did not expect it to happen this year, but in the back of my mind, this topic has been something that I've been wanting to present to a much broader audience for some time now. I just didn't know what it was going to look like.
Yeah.
It's like planting a hybrid plant or something, and you're like, this is. I know it's going to be interesting, but what will it be? A vegetable? Will it be a fruit? I'm not sure. What's it going to look like? I'm just going to nourish it every day and then see the final product, what it's going to look like. So those were really my thoughts about it. But I think it was just perfect, though, because this was, and you and I have talked about this. This was exactly the kind of positive hopefulness that we all needed right now.
Yes.
So I have a belief in that things will happen to you when you're ready to receive it or when it's supposed to happen. So I guess this was the time that it was supposed to happen, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yes. And it seems like it's opened up a lot of just energy, because it seems like ongoing, a lot of things opening up. And I think that's just so wonderful to really just even add more traction and pull towards your message, towards the work that you're doing that is so valuable and needed. And I just love hearing more and more from others on the impact of your work. And I think, I mean, how rewarding does it feel that the work that you are doing, and to be able to see the ways of which it is really truly making an impact for other people?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think that it's important when we do work that affects people's lives to always have it in the forefront of our minds and to have that be the center of what we do. Because oftentimes what we see on TV, people in the public eye, is that sometimes that gets lost. That why we are conveying messages, why we are engaged in any form of advocacy gets lost. And that's when the work isn't, one, to me, meaningful, and two, it's not authentic, and three, it doesn't serve the community that you're supposed to be serving. And so you need to step back a little bit and see why you're actually doing that work. But for me to know that even during, after, and even now, hearing from communities that I'm very honored to represent, to say that they felt it was their story. They felt that that's how they've been feeling.
Yeah.
They've shared, that's my story, my family's story. I couldn't ask for more, because it definitely tells me that the direction in which I want to take the messaging, or trying to take the messaging, is conveying what's true to them as well, the community. So that's important to me.
That's beautiful. Okay, let's dive into this subject matter here. Let's really dive into it. So we're seeing a rise in consciousness around narcissism. This is what I would consider, what I have said, is the age of the narcissist. And we're really just seeing ego at its greatest, and superiority, especially in regards to the current administration that we are transitioning from. Would you be willing to discuss the toxic nature of this egoic superiority, and how it applies to colonization and the pressures of assimilation in our society?
I love that question. It's a very big question, because it encompasses so much, not just for refugees. I don't think that we're unique in feeling this way. As we all know, for hundreds of years since the onset of this nation, there has been a overarching and a very strong emphasis that doing things one way and looking one way and behaving one way is the only way to do things. And that's not even done subtly. It's been done in ways that have been brutal, have been violent, have been atrocious. And even now we see that, whether in subtle forms or in very blatant forms. And it, to me, sends a message to those who are in underrepresented communities, who are marginalized, that American is a one-size-fit-all. If you fall out of that perimeter for whatever reason, whether it's your skin tone, whether if you're multilingual, whether if your zip code is somewhere else, or even your international code is from somewhere else,
Right.
then you're not like us, and therefore you're not one of us. And that's been the underlining theme, as we've seen most recently for the past 4 years, is that there is a reinforcement that if you don't comply within this time frame or this framework, then you're not going to be accepted. You won't reap the rewards for not conforming, for not being more like the dominant culture.
Yeah, the dominant culture for sure that dictates to us what the norm is. And I love how you're pointing out it's that one size fit all approach that we have that just isn't serving us. Can you speak more to the detriment of that one size speaks all, or one size fits all? Like what does that do as far as your ability to have your identity, your ability to have your wholeness, when that one size fits all approach is being placed on you?
I was very fortunate to have an upbringing that took pride in our uniqueness and took pride in my lineage and my heritage and my culture. But I know not everyone had that nurturing environment. And I know not everyone has that support or perhaps even inner strength to recognize how wrong that is, to completely minimize someone or just disown who they are and their identity from the get-go because they don't fit into that framework again.
Right.
And so I have seen, and I have spoken to many others who are either refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, or stateless people, and that causes quite a bit of detriment, and it manifests in a lot of different ways. It manifests in people retreating back to not even being part of the more dominant culture society because they feel as though they're being judged or they're being excluded or ostracized for things that, of course, you can't control.
Right.
You know, traits and identities that you can't control. And of course, you can't control where you're born. Of course not. Or I've seen it manifest in ways where people do feel pressured into making themselves more accepted into the dominant society, whether it be changing their names, whether it being forgetting their past, whether it being not wanting to discuss what they've gone through. You know, it's just so different from so many people. But the underlining theme that I've seen that is the same when we feel this this pressure and this dominance to assimilate is that when they're able to step back and really see the value of themselves and their uniqueness and what their country represents and the beauty of that strength,
Right.
all of a sudden you see them appreciating that more and coming forward with their authenticity more. But it takes time. This is not a quick process. You have all these external forces that tell you otherwise, that it's wrong to speak another language, that it's wrong to have a name like mine, that it's wrong to eat foods that they're not familiar with, that they can't pronounce, that now all of a sudden it's the hip thing to eat, decades later when we have known about this forever.
Yeah.
And so I think it manifests a lot differently for people, but in the long run, I think it causes not only for the individual, but society misses out on what they bring to the table too. their
Yes.
wholeness and their uniqueness and their beauty and all those wonderful personal experiences that make them so rich and interesting.
You know, when you talk about that, one of my best friends, she has an accent, and for a long time she used to have some deep insecurities about her accent, and the ways of which she felt that she was being treated differently or being seen as less than, because of her accent. And her accent is really what makes her like, one, unforgettable, but it's just so beautiful. And the ways of which it's by the pressures that we create with this, this one size fits all sort of approach. When I hear from her the insecurities that she's had to walk in her life and to come into her power, of her identity, of who she is, I mean, to rob her of that ability to feel in her power, and the ways that we don't recognize how we're doing that to one another, and what we're robbing ourselves from, and the opportunity of the ways that she would hold herself back from speaking or from engaging with people, which she's such a beautiful, lovely person that anyone who meets her just like loves her. So it's so telling about the what we miss out on, by having these conditionings, right, put in place. You talked in your talk about being asked to change your name, and I would like you to share the emotional state, the feeling around what it is to be asked to change your name to make it easier for people, and why that is such a detriment, not only to refugees, to you, to others, but to what we are also missing out on by removing the heritage, the culture of someone's name when they're coming here.
No, I love that you asked that question because our names and our ethnicity are one of the first identifiers of who we are when we enter into this world. And to me, that is something that is so extraordinarily powerful, because you're given a name for a reason. You're given a name because someone carefully chose that name for you. And that name symbolizes something much greater than even just you. It represents your lineage. It represents your heritage. It represents characteristics of who you are. And that's how you present yourselves to the world, is through your name. Mm-hmm. I had given a talk last spring at DU, and it was the significance of my name. It was all about my name, and it talks about just not being able to even, like you said, participate in my entire wholeness as an individual, as a human being, because people would hesitate to even call on me in grade school. And because of that, look at all the different opportunities that could have flourished into for not only to hear what I had to say, but to hear other people's reactions to what I had to say, to create that space for wholeness and community for these kids who still haven't found themselves. They're just too young, but especially for those who have lost everything. And those are the intangible items that I had spoken about in my talk that are so important to us, because it's not an item you carry with you. It's just something you have with you all the time. And being asked to change something, and quite honestly, like I mentioned, I cannot shorten my name anymore. It's one syllable.
It's one syllable, which is amazing.
I tell people I'd be like Prince with like a symbol, it's like this is what we're resorting to. It's like, except mine would be like a cupcake, you know?
Right.
And then I'm like, this is incredible that I have learned the entire English language. And to some would even say I speak it better than native English speakers. And yet it's still not good enough.
Right.
It's still not good enough. You have to keep assimilating until you've lost everything. And then maybe, just maybe, you'll be accepted. But I highly doubt it, because then there will be some other arbitrary item added for us to prove ourselves yet again.
Wow. Yeah, that is so, that cuts deep. Yeah, no, that cuts deep. We have some comments here that I just want to share with you. Amazing. Kendall, thank you for your engagement here. Kendall says, most of us fail to realize that if we were all the same, the world would be so much less interesting and so monotonous. We must recognize and receive the beauty of others who don't look, think, or act the same way as we do. That's beautiful. Rather than marginalizing them, we need more inclusion for these different groups. Your name makes you unique. So you wanted to say that.
I would never have had to give my talk if everyone were like you and Sarah, by the way. I would just talk about textbooks or something.
Bring it, Kendall. Yes, so true. Kathy. Hi, Kathy. So good to see you on here. Thanks for tuning in. And Candace Ferguson, sending you lots of love. Thanks for tuning in to us tonight. Kathy has a really great question around yesterday's events at the Capitol. Specifically, how you feel that impacts the assimilation or confusion or otherwise of you, refugees, or the groups you belong to. She knows that yesterday's events were awful for lots of reasons, so don't feel compelled to dive deep in that. But if you want to, if you would share your feelings about the incident from yesterday at the Capitol.
Well, we all witnessed this act of violence, and I worked in Homeland Security, so I can say this: it's an act of terrorism.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take someone who's worked in the field to know what they saw was atrocious.
Right.
To me, it's just ironic that in the country that touts to be the number one country in everything, that arrogantly calls other countries shithole countries, that tells other people that they're criminals, are behaving in this manner. And I know that the entire world was watching, and that includes people from my country, people from Africa, people from Europe, people from Latin America, people all over the world. Yeah. And I know my entire refugee community and immigrant community, who I am so honored to speak with and sometimes on behalf of, is that whatever it is that they have been asking us to stand for and change for is exactly the opposite of what we saw yesterday. It represents all the ideals that they're telling us to live up to, but they can't even do the one thing, like abide by and respect the Constitution, abide by and respect old traditions that have been ingrained in the doctrine of what this country is built upon. Pronounce a name that's one syllable. I mean, my God, it makes us wonder why expectations are only placed upon us, and everyone else is absolved from it because of where they're born or what they look like or what language they speak. Had a group of refugees or immigrants or people of color had done this, the outcome would have been very different, and we would have been judged very differently as well.
Right. And there would have been, there would have been more police. There would have been, they would have been prepared for, and what's interesting is how that's typically not the case in so many protests that happen of people demonstrating their First Amendment right. that it's not about violence, it's not about rioting. It's the rioting that's incited to break the peaceful protesting that is happening. And here we are seeing the mirror that looks a lot different and is, of course, much more violent in its approach, and just very egoic, very superior. I think what you have to say there specifically about, I mean, what an interesting perspective to come into this country and what you're asked to do and how you're asked to be as a refugee to come here, and what it is to be an American citizen, and then to see people who were born here and just them not being respectful in any way of the freedoms and the rights and the privileges that we have here, and not being in that integrity is just, it's really something to behold. Thanks for that question, Kathy, and bringing that up right now, because it is very telling. I'm curious where you think, Nat, as far as where we're moving with this current administration, the work that you do, where do you feel like the work around refugees and protecting their freedoms and their identities, how is that evolving, or what are you seeing right now?
Well, when we initially arrived in the United States, there was no program, there was no platform, because we were one of the newer diasporas of immigration, of recent immigration. And so it was pretty much let's see how it works, let's see how it turns out. And there was a huge learning curve for everyone to see what they were going to do with us, this influx of people who were coming in. And of course, we didn't speak the language. I didn't speak a word of English when I arrived in the United States, and neither did my entire family. And it's back then, there was a lot of reason for a lot of people to not understand even basic concepts of war, refugees, refugee camps, assimilation, acculturation. There was, again, a huge learning curve for everyone. And here we are decades later, and people still don't quite understand about it, which is unfortunate. And I think you're going to prioritize what's important for you to spend your time to learn more about, right? That's just how human nature works. Someone who is into sports are going to spend most of their time learning about sports. Someone who enjoys cooking, they're going to spend more time trying to master their craft and learn more about it. But it seems like this particular topic is still very unknown to a lot of people. I mean, if I were to share this fact with you right now, that there are currently over 26 million refugees stranded on refugee camps around the world, what would your initial reaction be?
Shock.
People,
shock.
See, and this is the biggest humanitarian crisis going on right now. And I haven't even accounted for the 72 million that are currently displaced in the world. Displacement could mean displaced in your own country. Displaced could mean outside of your country that don't qualify under the refugee status because of a very specific status. And so when people hear these numbers, they're a little shocked, for one, because they didn't think the number was so high. But then two, if it gives you that visceral feeling, yes, absolutely, you should be outraged that this humanitarian crisis is not being talked about or understood in the way that it should be understood. I've spoken to elected officials when I lobby or when I advocate who don't even know the difference between a refugee and an immigrant. And that's a problem. Or asylum seeker, that's a problem. And so they group everyone in, and then they target on the group they dislike the most. And then they do a blanket no to everyone. That's usually how I see it, when they don't even understand the very basics of it. And there's no excuse for it because it's decades later now. We have resources everywhere for you to have a better understanding of this crisis, and that we have a responsibility to ensure that people have safety and have refuge in the worst times of their life. Because guess what? That's how you would want to be treated if you lost everything and you were fleeing something horrible beyond your control.
Yeah, Kendall is saying heartbreaking. I have to agree with you, Kendall. Like, I'm trying to hold back some tears because when you hear statistics like that, it's extremely overwhelming. Candace has a really good question here, meaning take action and support in a meaningful way. How do we do that? What are the ways that we can help and be advocates in this situation? How do we help the course towards change?
Thank you for that question, Candace. I love when people take their interests a lot further into action. That's what I'm always trying to push. Don't get me wrong. Refugees and immigrants, we love allies. We need all the allies we can get because, as you've seen at the Capitol last night, yes, we need tremendous support. I'll name off a couple of things that are really helpful, actually. Just demystify the mystique and the misinformation that is going on about refugees and immigrants, and ensure that it's being presented in a very meaningful way. For instance, you can have something like a dinner when COVID is over. You can have something like a dinner where you invite people from different ethnicities, different countries, to really have a meaningful dialogue about their own experiences and humanizing us as actual people, because I can't believe I'm saying this, but I have to constantly do that. Remind people that we're people. I know it sounds like some sci-fi movie that I'm trying to convince you to believe, but I remember when I presented those numbers and during one of my advocacy trips, and I said, every single one of those numbers is an actual person. And over 40% of those refugees are children. So I want for you to understand that they're there by no choice of our own. And there are 26 million of me waiting on a refugee camp right now, hoping that there's no Muslim ban, hoping that you would raise the numbers up to, since as high as they were back in 1980, we're at our historic low of only 15,000 right now. It used to be 100. When I came over, it was 120,000 every year. Now it's down to 15, down from last year's 18,000 that the presidential determination had set. So every single number is not just a number. It's a person who just wants an opportunity to live and thrive like we all do. And I think that gets lost in it all. So Candace, I know that was a long response, but humanize us, read text and read and see documentaries that really capture who we are. There's one documentary that I think everyone should see about refugees. It's called Human Flow. It was released, I believe it's 2017 or 2018 by social activist and artist who's Chinese. His name is Ai Weiwei. That's Aiwei.
Oh, he's incredible.
Yes.
And what he's gone through. Oh my gosh.
Yes, he is a refugee as well. He's in exile. He lives in Germany right now, and he has his studio in Germany. But he came out with a movie, and you feel like you're actually walking with refugees, and like you're actually in camps. And he does these gorgeous drone overviews of the refugee camps, to the point where he goes so high up with these drones, they look like ants. I mean, these refugees, there's so many of them. And it's just heartbreaking, right, when you see how many. And I highly suggest you watch that documentary, read books. There's a book called The Refugees by Viet Thanh Nguyen, who's also a Vietnamese refugee. He also stayed on a refugee camp, won the Pulitzer Prize. His book is a collection of stories from different refugees. And just make sure that it's being presented in the way that is that humanizes who the subject is. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want, right? We all just want to be treated with some dignity. And to be seen as a person again, I know that sounds outrageous that I even have to say this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that it does sound outrageous, but the fact that we even need to point out the fact that it sounds outrageous, I really do believe that we're living in a society that's becoming ever increasingly desensitized to the ways of which authenticity and wholeness, the ways of which our cultural identities and heritage, our race, our, like, what makes us unique, is being desensitized, is being stripped away or being shoved under the rug, or othered, rather than it being appreciated and celebrated, which was in the heart of your message. Was another thing that we really need to do, is to learn how to celebrate, celebrate multiculturalism, celebrate the uniquenesses that are here. Candace says that she cannot wait to host you for dinner. She wants to be a part of this. And as it says, being an ally is the very basic way we should act as humans. Very basic.
Thank you,
so, yeah, I think that is a great.
So can I please add something to what I just said too?
Yes.
I love that you said to be intentional about it, about the engagement, and to add to that, to make it meaningful. So I'm gonna have some levity in all of this by telling you, because I know it's such a heavy topic.
Yes.
I want to share with you that the first type of calendar that I was introduced to is the lunar calendar, which is completely opposite from what we celebrate in the U.S., which is the solar calendar. And so I get 2 New Years, but the more meaningful one to me is, of course, the Asian Lunar New Year. And a lot of people call it Chinese New Year because that's the only thing they hear. But I want to let people know that at least 7 to 8 other Asian countries celebrate Lunar New Year. So it's almost like if you go to France and say, Merry American Christmas, they'll be like, what? You know, because so many other countries celebrate Christmas, right?
Yeah.
So I was telling someone who had adopted a Chinese daughter, and she was like, yeah, we're going to celebrate Lunar New Year. And I'm like, oh, so what do you, and I got all excited, like, ooh, someone is getting this, like, as excited as I am. She's like, we're going to take them to Panda Express, and we're going to celebrate. I just had to stop for a second, because I thought, you know, sweet and sour chicken isn't even Chinese, for one. And Panda Express is a chain. There's so many things wrong with this. You know, what are you teaching your adopted kid about their authentic self, right?
Yes.
Their authentic culture. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Make it meaningful, not some novelty where you're just wanting, you know, the sweet and sour soup at Panda Express and the sweet and sour chicken. And only speaking English the whole time, you know, get some of us folks who look a little shade darker, you know, or speak another language, you know, to liven things up a little bit, or learn something new from people. And like you said, have the humility to open yourselves up, you know, to more than sweet and sour chicken at Pan Express or Tokyo Joe's. You know, when I hear that, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yes.
Please pick something else.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Joanna, I love your feedback here. She says, be open to cultures. Her family didn't teach her the Tagalog language because they were afraid that she would be bullied. She comes from a family of immigrated people from other nations. If you are, teach your culture and don't be afraid to teach your language and customs to be carried on. Thanks for saying that, Joanna. That is so true. I have to say, I have, you know, a few friends who have felt ashamed and carrying shame around their culture. Their parents carried their shame around their culture, and so they didn't have their children learn their language. And they really kept that away because they really wanted their children to be American, right? Fully assimilated. And it's just such a it's such an unfortunate side effect of the ways of which their children and their children's children, are robbed of that unique connection, right, to their roots. So, Joanna, thanks for bringing that forward. Now, do you want to speak to that at all?
Hi, Joanna. I'm happy to answer that question as well. It's a very real thing for immigrants and refugees, or even children of immigrant refugees, to experience that pressure to assimilate and that pressure to basically eliminate your identity in order to be accepted. The further out the generations are from the person who has immigrated here, the more it is that they're expected to lose all of that. And it happens every single day. It happens to every family. And of course, I respect whatever decision that family makes that's best for them, because they're going to want to provide the best for their family and give them the best shot at success in however way they define that. But there's a part of me that is really saddened when they had to relinquish that part of themselves, because society and the dominant culture places so much pressure on us to fit into that mold. Otherwise, you're not rewarded. You won't be rewarded for the promotions. You won't be rewarded with the awards in school. You won't be awarded in society. You won't get selected for certain things. People think I joke about it, but sometimes I do wish I had an accent, because I would be sound more legit, like I would have street creds or something, like I'm truly a refugee and this is my journey and this is how far I've come. But it was really astounding to me when an immigrant had pointed out to me not too long ago. They said, now it's a privilege that you don't have an accent. And it made me stop a little bit.
Wow.
And I thought, I know. And I thought, the things that people have to go through who have an accent, because at one time I did. I didn't speak any English. But what benefits that go along with that, because of the rules that are set by the dominant culture for you to have to acclimate and again just shed so much of your identity again in order for you to feel accepted. Would I have gotten these opportunities to do the things I do? Maybe. Do I have as much opportunity as someone who's part of the dominant culture? Absolutely not. That's just not the reality of it all. But it does make me pause to think that it's just so much a part of who you are. Your language, your culture, your heritage, and where you came from. And when I hear people say that, I always try to encourage them to do something to connect in that way that is meaningful for them, so that they can feel a personalness to their identity as well. And I have never had anyone, by the way, my record is pretty good, that I'm going to jinx myself now. Anytime I have recommended someone to do research on their background and their heritage and their culture, learn their language, I always get a big hug out of it. They feel very fulfilled.
Wow.
So my track record's pretty good. If that's something that you're on the path to doing, not only for yourself, but for your family too, and your ancestors.
Right.
And there's just so much fulfillment in that. To be able to express yourself in all your wholeness and who you are. Because I can tell you right now, when I'm speaking Vietnamese, that's when I'm truly who I am. English is a borrowed language for me.
Yes.
English is like a fork and a knife. I use chopsticks. Forks and knives are like English, and I am the chopstick side. Because when I even feel like I'm committing food blasphemy when I don't use chopsticks with Asian food. This is inside secret now. This is not authentic. I can't be doing this kind of thing. So I just feel like there's a wholeness to you when you're able to really express yourself in the way that you're intended to express yourself, which is your true identity.
Yes. Yeah, yes, being true to yourself. Let's dive into that a little bit here because we talked about a little bit about this before, but I had this thought where, we're talking about wholeness, we're talking about authenticity and how important that is, and the dominant culture that exists. And there's this reality that, here in America, where we say we celebrate differences and we celebrate uniqueness, and yet, if I can speak candidly for myself, I mean, one, as a Black woman, but also in the ways of which I know what it is being American and what that comes with, and the standard that exists. We're all conditioned to not be authentic. We're all conditioned to fit into society. As a Black woman who has a sexual orientation that is not within the norm. Like, there are ways of which always having to box yourself in and to have to live in this way and present yourself in this way. I mean, is anybody really living authentically or having their own wholeness? And isn't it interesting how people would come into this country and we would say to them, here's the law of the land, to meld yourself into what it is to be American, to strip you away from the authenticity that you were really given the freedom to have, that was actually truly celebrated in your culture and your heritage. Because I hear this a lot from my other friends from different nationalities. My dad lives in Germany, my sisters are German, living in Europe, and there's a different kind of culture there of which they really honor who they are, their authenticity. They're more liberated that way. Do you think that isn't it interesting? It feels like possibly is there like a resentment that is leading this superiority of let me show you and tell you how to fit yourself in the box, because I too have had to live my life fitting in this box, and this is how it has to be.
No, I love your question, and thank you for sharing about where your family is at too, as far as being in Germany, and just how different they see societal norms there compared to here in the United States.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is, yes, of course, there could be a resentment, because that would have people questioning themselves and who they are. If someone has such a strong identity and such a strong connection to their culture, and the person who is challenging that has no clue where they're from, how can you have a connection to something that you have no knowledge of, or that you've never been to, or that you've never experienced? It's like me saying that I have a connection to Mars. I have no idea. I know it's probably cold, and I know they don't have a national flag. But how can you have a personal connection to something if you have never made that meaningful connection to it, in the sense of even, I don't even think some people have authentic proof from their own country.
Yeah.
What they think is authentic is not authentic. Or if they've even done the research to find out the beauty of what that culture has to offer. Because the minute that you start doing that research on your own, you start appreciating other people's too. That's what I've learned, is that it's not difficult to celebrate other cultures once you've celebrated your own. And what I find here is that there's that lack of appreciation for history. And that's where all your culture comes from. They hear history, they hear boring, they hear too dry, I don't want to do the work on this. But in order to find out more about yourself, you have to learn about your past, which basically connects to who you are and your lineage. I can't help but comment on a couple of the comments that I had seen too, is like Candace was like, anything with the word express is not authentic. I love that. And then Joanna was like, my mom doesn't even know how to use a fork. And I'm like, that makes sense. It's like the Asian connection. I love it. I love it. But I think if people just really take the time and learn more about your ethnicity, your country of origin, and take pride in it in a way that does not exclude others, an inclusive way of looking at it, then you'll learn to appreciate other cultures as well, because it just opens up the possibilities and it really piques your interest. I believe, and I don't know why people wouldn't want to. It's one of the most beautiful and rewarding things that you can have. And those who are watching or those who know me know that the more diversity and the more cultures that are around me is when I'm the happiest. Because I thrive in that environment, because I know that there's just there's just a beautiful element to that is lacking in day-to-day life here. And if you don't make it intentional, if you don't make it meaningful, it won't happen.
Yes. Joanna, I think you have a great question here for Nat, and I'm gonna add a little bit to this, Nat. How do you feel about the state of Colorado and how they're doing with the refugee support efforts? And I also now would like to add in, I'm a Colorado native, and I'm curious how you think the state of Colorado is doing, not only with the refugee support efforts, but when we look at gentrification that is happening and growing and increasing here in Colorado, the cost of living, resources, housing, where refugees are finding their community, where they're finding housing. Yeah, how is that going? And does that does it seem to be feeling balanced in resources and what's available?
No, that's a great question. It has been and I focused on the past 4 years, not by coincidence, but just by reality, is that resources have slowly deteriorated because you cannot justify having funds in Colorado without the number of refugees arriving. And it was done intentionally so that the numbers were so low that some organizations had to close their doors, which basically means the 26 million stay on the refugee camp. So there's a definite domino effect to decisions, and there's consequences when the correct and humanitarian decisions are not being made. So in Colorado, we have a good amount of organizations. I serve on the board of one of them, and I have to tell you this story because I think it's really tells you the value in resettlement. Lutheran Family Services Rocky Mountains was the first refugee resettlement organization in Colorado. They're one of a handful. And they had received my community in Colorado and we were the first recipients of the Refugee and Asylee program in the state of Colorado, which is great. And now I serve on their board, which is really amazing. And to me, it's how serendipitous that a refugee who had been the recipient is now providing insight and decisions being made for other refugees and the programs that are associated with that. That's powerful to me. And that should be happening more often, to have people who know what that experience is like, to understand it and to make decisions that impact people's lives in a very meaningful way. So in that regard, for the consistency of services that this organization has provided, it's been wonderful as far as being able to provide those services. Other organizations, there's African Community Center, there's Mango House, there's Project Worthmore, there's Village Exchange Center, Rocky Mountain Welcome Center. There's quite a few that are doing this work, and they provide different resources. Back in 2018, 19, it was a year or two ago. I'm trying to figure out this new year, about a year or two ago. There was a Senate bill that was introduced to the state of Colorado because of this uncertainty of funding that we kept seeing because the presidential determination was made on a whim and whatever they saw as appropriate, which is, again, always extremely low. We're not even accepting like 0.01% of the refugees in the world. We're not even accepting that at all. So we wanted to ensure that funding was going to be made. A group of us testified both in the Senate and the House subcommittees to ensure that this funding would come to refugees no matter what is decided. And that's helped. But if the refugees aren't arriving, we can't justify the funds again. So I'm hopeful that the new administration will keep their word in ensuring that we provide for the most vulnerable, the most traumatized populations, because we have a humanitarian responsibility to do so. I know that with being a refugee, there are so many issues that people never discuss that are more secondary or tertiary issues rather than just housing and employment, which are the two initial things people focus on for us. And of course, language acquisition. That's totally normal. I mean, imagine having to do all that, get a job, master the language, find a home, put your kids in school, all in 6 months or less after you lost your homeland, because that's what's required of us.
Wow.
So in addition to that, there's this thing that there's this theme that has been resonating since forever, but most recently is the family separation that happens to refugees too. So imagine being a mother who had a partner or a significant other at the time, but because of the way the system is set up, the families are separated. She's now a single mom in a foreign country, not speaking the language. I mean, just imagine the kind of exploitation that puts her in. In abusive relationships, being trafficked, being paid, or not even paid, being an indentured worker somewhere. Or the JBS plants where you're seeing meatpacking plants taking advantage of refugees and immigrants, paying them meager fees and no sort of protections during the pandemic right now, and just treating them as commodities. You know, there's so much exploitation that happens on top of the trauma that we've experienced by coming here, by losing everything. So imagine, there's just, the need is still there, but it needs to be very focused and really centered upon our community, and not just through that Western eye that expects us to have all these things and then not account for, like what you were saying, the trauma, all these other issues that have never been addressed.
Yeah, I think in what you're talking there, the detrimental effects there, it mirrors our past history, which looks exactly like how colonization was, where families were ripped from one another, where you had no say where you were going and who was going where, and, you know, and in so many ways not having the control or the stability over your own welfare, well-being, your life. And if we could talk about trauma just a little bit, the trauma that you experience as a refugee going through this kind of transition, and the trauma that you're leaving behind, only to go through the trauma of acclimating into a new environment. There's something to be said about the trauma because, again, when we think about the dominant society, there's a way of which we do not cultivate at all the kind of resources to have the awareness of trauma and its effects of trauma, and how the kind of support that's needed for that trauma. And in so many ways that is telling of the fact that we all carry so much trauma that has been denied the ability to process through. Would you say that is possibly one of the reasons why there is a lack of awareness or wanting to have that awareness of trauma? Because possibly the dominant society is not at all understanding the impacts or detriment that trauma carries?
I think you make a good point, but I also think that there's a lack of recognition to our experience. Not too many people in the United States have gone through a war and have had to flee for their lives. It's it's an experience that most of us either know very personally, but some of us know very personally, but most have not. So it's almost that whole that whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps Western mentality that you need to overcome this no matter what happens, and you need to be productive members of society, not understanding that the loss is so tremendous. So tremendous. I mean, it's not just about losing a member of your family. It's about losing your actual house, about losing your identity in your space. It's about losing your entire country. It's about losing your culture and your language. It's about losing everything that you have associated with who you are, and now being told to lose all of that, in addition to hurry up and get housing, a job, and why can't you speak it? What I've learned is with the English acquisition is, first, it's you need to learn English, which I understand. It's a necessary tool to convey what it is that you need to convey. And then it's what you don't understand everything I'm saying. And then it's, why do you still have an accent? It just gets pushed further and further and further, not understanding that anything that a person is able to do after that experience is an accomplishment. Anything. But because these individuals who are the biggest critics of who we are and our experiences, they've never felt that loss. It's kind of like this. I try to tell people, one day all of a sudden they don't have ears. And then all of a sudden they're like, I kind of miss my ears. You know, you don't know until you actually go through it, and then that loss will remind you of what you don't have. It's when you don't have a house that you recognize the value in the house. It's when you don't have security with something that you all of a sudden crave security, and you fixate on security. You know, when you don't have shoes, when you're barefoot all the time and you notice other people with shoes, now that becomes important. But at the very basic core of it all, it's like you said, it goes back to the lack of compassion and the narcissism of expecting everyone to be the same. And when I say the same, it's not the same as me. It's the same as them.
Right. Yep. Dominant culture. In that, when you were talking about speak English, in your talk, you shared the scenario at a wedding where someone yelled out, say it in English. Why do you think that people have such a hard time embracing the unfamiliar and demanding it to conform?
Well, I'm curious from someone who didn't experience that, what you thought of that moment when you shared that.
Yeah. It's about control. It's about control because, and maybe that goes to the point of what you're saying of having not had the experience, that if you have the privilege of not having to not understand, or if you have the privilege to have your routines, or have your experiences, the predictability, right, the way we become accustomed to things as they are, that to have that taken away incite some form of fear, and to be able to say that gives you power in the situation. But I also feel like it's powerlessness of that person too, in that, people who understand what it is to be powerless, right? They have a way of honoring and giving space to what is unknown and what is uncertain. But those who have not, it's like, I think there's a fear, and then there's like an inserting control because yet they've never, like you said, they've never had to face it. What do you think?
I think you're right in all accounts, but I also think that there's an arrogance to that too.
There is, yeah.
Which is why one of my suggestions in my TEDx talk was to go to or travel to spaces where you're a part of the underrepresented.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Because I think it's important to have that humility, you know, and I always love being in spaces where I don't understand anything. I love it because it really recenters you into thinking that not everything has to evolve around what you're doing or your language.
Yes.
And I think in that moment, it is more a reflection upon the person who said it than it is of the people who heard it.
Right.
And that loss of power was so, it suffocated them so much it manifested into something extremely inappropriate,
belligerent,
and disrespectful.
Right.
And disrespectful to not only the bride and the groom, but our entire culture.
Yeah.
I mean, my God.
Yeah, no, 100%. When you, in that point that you're making about, that you made in your TEDx talk about put yourself in spaces with people who are not like you, I'm gonna speak honestly that we live in Colorado, and much of Colorado is white space. It's the population here is it's increasingly like the Latinx community is growing here, but it is predominantly Caucasian here in America. I mean, in Colorado, and so I get a lot from people I don't know where to go, or I'm not sure how or what to do. What would you have to share with people when you say that and they're like, well, how do I do that? I don't, because to me, it's like that's your fear that's getting in the way, because again, this is what's unknown, but there are many ways which you could do that. What would you say?
I would agree with it too. And this ties into Candace's question earlier about what you can do. So I'm going to answer two questions with one answer. Haha. Because I think it's pertinent to both of your questions. I do agree that in our state, in Colorado, there's a lot of segregation. There's pockets of communities, but it's not so obvious to us that there is diversity. I remember years back when Hickenlooper was the governor, and he was advertising a airline that flew had a direct flight to Japan, and his selling point was, we're Native American land. We have Native Americans everywhere. And I'm like, what? It's kind of like that, where that's not the representation of our state. You actually have to seek out and be very intentional as to what you do to find these spaces, right? And so what I would recommend is doing the homework. If there's a particular culture that you're, and I love Becky, who is part of TEDx too. She had started this adventure of trying to learn a new culture every month. And I can't believe she shared this with me, but she said she was inspired because of my talk to really start engaging and exploring other cultures. So she is trying to learn about them every month. But here's what I would say to that is, do your homework and start showing up into spaces where the communities are at, whether at a celebration, whether at a lecture. I'm kind of a lecture junkie. I love to give lectures and I love to hear lectures. So I like to feed my mind with a lot of different things that I am not familiar with or I just want to learn more about. Get into these spaces, make the connections, and it'll just come naturally with these communities. Don't let it be a forced situation, where you see people in Lodo with a big, taco hat and trying to think that they're being cultural and all this nonsense, Make it meaningful, go and have a personal conversation with these communities. When they're ready, when you're ready, it'll just naturally happen. You're going to have very meaningful relationships if you nurture it, just like anything else. And that's more authentic than forcing the situation. But just having an open mind into knowing that you're about to embark on something pretty cool, Pretty cool that you haven't before.
Yes. I would love that idea about lectures, because that is a great way. I love going to lectures too.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I would like to talk before we, as we start to close out here, but your talk itself, we could only fit so much into that window of time. Is there anything that that you would like to share that you weren't able to fit into that talk, a message that you might still really want to get across? Maybe we've already hit it tonight, but if there's anything else or more that you would want to share.
No, I appreciate that. Honestly, I can elaborate on all of the topics that I talked about, but I really honestly think that the true messaging behind what I had to say was able to be captured in that talk. It's probably because I don't want to look back with regrets and say that there were parts of it that I shouldn't have included. I've kind of like self-talked myself into thinking it was good, it's good. No more. It was sufficient. But honestly, I think it really captured the essence of a lot of the overarching themes that I've been trying to present to the world and present to the community at large, that many of us experience, not just me. I'm not speaking about just me. I'm speaking about a lot of us who have been othered, a lot of us who are part of the marginalized community, a lot of us who are underrepresented, and a lot of us who have these arbitrary checklists that everybody expects us to complete, and that it's never ending. That list keeps going. It keeps going. I do want to say one thing, though. It still falls in line with my talk, but one of the talks that I'd given a couple years ago was the fact that the title of my talk was, "When am I going to be good enough?" Something like that. And I basically give an example of what it's like to arrive here. So the first thing is be a U.S. citizen. Okay, check. Speak English. Check. Be a productive, or be patriotic, and I work for Homeland Security. Check. Be a productive individual. I'm like, well, okay, I've been published in academic journals. I have my master's degree. I have, I'm naming off all these things. Check. And then it's, I basically say, I've checked off all these things and you still don't see me as one of you. That's interesting, but you don't expect that of the person who was born here at the In-N-Out Burger to complete all these things. It's just me. So I leave you with that profound question because I don't have the answer. They have the answer, but they won't admit to it. They won't admit to the real reason.
Right.
So with that said, I think what is acceptable is so arbitrary. And of course, it's always made by the dominant group.
Yes.
And everyone else has to fall in line because they'll remind us when we're not.
Exactly. And they do. And they do. Nga, it was so wonderful to speak with you tonight. I do want to close out with some of the really amazing things that have opened up, starting with there is a mural that was painted of you by I Am Detour, Thomas Evans, an incredible muralist who has done some pretty amazing pieces across the city. And he did a mural of you, Nga. Where is this mural located? Let everybody know.
Well, thank you. And I want to give a shout to Thomas Evans, I Am Detour. And it was because of him that it even happened. So he put all the work to him and his team. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that although you see my face on the mural, it's really about every single refugee, immigrant, and every community that has always been forgotten about and who has fight for everything that we have. And even our own identity, to keep our own identity. So it's not just about representing me. I just happen to have my image on there, but the image should be like over 26 million, faces on there of people who need to be celebrated, because we're never the first ones to be selected for these recognitions. So it represents all of us. Honestly, it truly was a unexpected but also overwhelming moment for all of us. So I just want to make that very clear as far as the magnitude of that for all of us. So it's located on Champa between 23rd and 24th. The address of the building where it's located is 2400 Curtis Street, and it's on the back side in the alley. So if you happen to stop by, shoot me a selfie, because I would love to see you in front of it. I'm gonna make a little collage of everyone who's taken a selfie in front of it and just do this beautiful image. So if you decide to do that, send it to me. Yes.
Oh, I love that. And how did you find out about this? Like, did you know? Was it a surprise?
It was a little unreal. I had seen his work. I've been admiring his work for a while because, he's really a talented and gifted and very renowned artist, not just in Colorado, but nationally. And so he's done work like Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, John Lewis, just countless people. And again, not just in Colorado. So I had visited some of his murals, and I just thought, this person is so, we always admire things that we can't do ourselves, so I'm like, wow, this is so beautiful and it's so colorful. And he has a very iconic style, right? It's really colorful.
Yes, so vibrant and alive.
Yes. So a couple months after I had visited some of the murals, I received a message from him, and I thought, this can't be. No, I'm like, that's kind of a semi-common name, It's not like my name where it's me. It's not. It could be anybody. And he reached out and he said, I've been doing some research. Would you be okay with being on a mural? And I'm like, this is not the kind of thing that I get asked every lifetime,
Wow.
or day, or I don't know about anyone else, but this is not something normal for me at all. This is not something that I ever imagined. And I had to take a moment, and I didn't know if it was real. I didn't know why. I didn't know how. And we finally just connected, and he made it happen. But I had to keep it under wraps for months until he was back in town, because he had been painting all of these beautiful, beautiful murals across the nation. And so there was a part of me like, do I want to see it? No, I want to. No, yes, I want to see it. I had so many crazy feelings. Like, I wonder what it looks like. Maybe I don't want to see it. Oh, maybe I do. Oh, maybe I do. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't concentrate the whole day. I got like nothing done at work. I'm like, it was so surreal.
Amazing.
But he did such an incredible job. Yeah, I'm really honored and grateful that our community's being recognized in that way. I mean, again, we are never recognized for anything.
Right. Yes.
Never.
And also to give a platform for your work, because as people look for you, they see the platform of work and what you are doing in your community, and that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Also, you provided migrant training for NPR News Morning Edition StoryCorps. That is so cool. Tell me a little bit about that project.
Thank you. So again, I just want to preface it with that I didn't expect any of these things to happen, especially this year. None of it. I didn't expect any of it. I was just going about my year, trying to just go, do the best I can like everyone else. And so StoryCorps have reached out to me through my work, my advocacy work, and they're based out of Brooklyn, New York. And I've been a fan of their show because I listen to Morning Edition, and I sound like a commercial, NPR News Morning Edition, StoryCorps. So I've been a fan because what I love most about their show is that they provide human interest stories with real people, and it's unedited. It's just a beautiful account of what is going on in their lives in wherever in the United States. And so they have launched a program that focuses strictly on refugees and immigrants. And so they had reached out and knew that I had provided training to refugees and immigrants across the nation and said, would you be willing to provide this training to our facilitators? Of course, I was fangirling because I couldn't contain myself. I sounded quite delirious when I was saying yes, because I thought, oh my goodness, this is NPR, this is StoryCorps. Yeah. But and then I pause a little bit and I'm like, you know what? This has so many multiple benefits because not only did they have the humility to ask for this training from an actual refugee, but the fact that I wanted people from my community, refugees and immigrants, to not be re-traumatized when they're being interviewed in that situation. So I knew it was beneficial, aside from the fact that I'm a huge fan of the show, that it would have this ripple effect of really positiveness that were way beyond me, which I really loved about it.
Yeah, that's incredible. You also did a piece on medium.com, which you shared with us that was really incredible. So there's so many ways to connect with you and to connect with your work. How can people connect with you and follow you? They can follow you here on Facebook. Where else can we find you?
Well, thank you for sharing that as well. When I have some time, I do write a couple op-ed pieces, and it's primarily on social justice issues and things that are going on currently. I wrote something about the Muslim ban too. When it was passed they tried to pass it a couple years ago. Okay. I also wrote something about when the Miss Saigon musical had toured here in Denver, and why it's so appalling for my community. So this is my trailer into having you hopefully read the op-ed. In that you can find me on medium.com. You can find me on social media. And of course, you can always find me through Sarah if you can't find me through the social media routes. You can find me on Refugee Congress, where I serve as a delegate for Colorado, or Colorado Refugee Speakers Bureau, where I serve as one of the co-founders as well as a public speaker for this organization. You can find me through Christina Noble Children's Foundation, where I serve as an ambassador, or Lutheran Family Services Rocky Mountains, where I serve as a board member. And I'll stop it there because I've given enough options right now.
That's wonderful. Well, Nan, thank you so much. This has been a insightful and just a wealth of wisdom and knowledge that you've shared with all of us today. And I just hope that your message really carries forward. It's definitely left a resonant impact for me. And I know it's doing that for many others. I've already heard, as I told you, a few friends who told me that your talk was a talk that particularly was impressionable for them and had a very lasting impression. So, yes, and the work that you're doing, and the knowledge and the ways that we can be a part of the change and transformation that we seek, especially around refugees and celebrating multiculturalism. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that about the feedback, and thank you for having this space for me and all the other wonderful speakers that you've had and guests. So I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. And I'll see you at the next talk with Julie Ulstrup, who is talking about the power of being seen and the power of stepping into your power to be seen. So I'm really excited to talk with her next week. Have a great night, everyone. Happy New Year. Let it be a great 2021, and I'll see you at the next episode. Bye.